Hi, everybody. My name's Lindsey Telg. I'm an occupational therapist here in Gainesville, Florida, and I am excited to bring today the presentation that I would have given at the Story GNV talk. I want to sort of offer a little bit of a disclaimer that this presentation was, of course, written before COVID-19 was a reality. And so in some ways, as I was reviewing this and preparing to deliver it again today, I thought, oh, this may not sit quite right because of some of the things that have changed and have been happening recently. On the other hand, it's actually in some ways a really great time to stop and take stock of whether the life that you're living is the one that you really want. It's a great time in some ways to stop and think about what story you're writing. And so I sort of want to offer that disclaimer that as I move through the presentation and as we talk a little bit about these topics, I want you to sort of frame in your mind the before times, right? This doesn't super apply to what life is like right now because this is not normal. So I want you to think a little bit about before COVID and envision what maybe building a life after COVID looks like. As we move through some of these conversations. So the title of my talk today is What Occupies Our Time? What We Do or Who We Are. And really the crux of this that I would propose to you is that it's both. In occupational therapy, we don't use the term occupation the way it's used colloquially in the world. It doesn't mean your job. It means many other things, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the question I want to posit to you today is, how are you occupying your time? So for an occupational therapist, if you came in to see me for treatment for any of a variety of reasons, I would want to know about who you are as a person. I'm of course concerned with your medical diagnosis and the reason that brings you into treatment, but more importantly, I want to know who you are. Who you are, what you do, because that's the work that I do as an occupational therapist, is to get you back to doing the things that mean something and matter to you. More philosophically as an OT, I think that the things that we do sort of define who we are. Our stories, the overarching themes of our lives are kind of ultimately defined by the activities that we choose to do and those we have to do each and every day. And so our life stories become sort of an amalgam of all these everyday activities over time. And if that's the case, how do we make sure that all these little pieces coming together make up a meaningful life story that we can be proud of? So I will say, if you don't accept that initial proposition that everything that you do sort of ultimately makes up who you are, the rest of this talk is probably going to not sit super well with you. So if that's something you need to ponder, pause the video for a moment and kind of think about that. That what we do ultimately makes up who we are, and sometimes vice versa. So let me clarify a little bit about what occupations are. And this is occupations in terms of OT speak, in terms of my profession. So again, they're not jobs, although jobs can be an occupation, but they're actually goal-directed pursuits, so things that we do on purpose that typically extend over time. So they're not just kind of one-time things. They have some meaning to their performance, so they're not necessarily rote tasks that just happen. There's a purpose to them. And they often involve multiple tasks. So an occupation might be something like, in this photo here, being a parent, or being an aunt, or being a caregiver. That's comprised of multiple daily tasks that you do with some degree of intention in order to fulfill that role. So it is significantly more than just the stuff we do in the course of a day. Engagement is in the performance of occupations usually happens as a result of choice, of motivation, and of ascribing some meaning to the task that we're doing, often within a supportive context and environment. And so that's important because many of us are not operating under that ideal, right? We're not doing things simply because we choose to, we're motivated to, and they give us great meaning. We may have jobs that we don't feel particularly satisfied with. We may have roles in the community. We may have hobbies that have kind of long expired in their meaning for us. But in an ideal situation, the things that we do are born of choice, motivation, and meaning, and they occur with support from the world around us. And the reason that that's so important is that a piece of being healthy is engagement in occupations. Achieving health, well-being, and participation in life happens by engaging in the things that matter to us, by engaging in things that are born of choice, motivation, and meaning, and occur in supportive environments. So literally the things that you're doing are not just tasks, they're adding up to how well a person you are. And so these definitions are going to come from the World Health Organization, and I want to clarify those. Health is the state of complete physical, mental, social well-being. It's more than just not being sick. It's actually being well. Whereas a piece of that is well-being. So again, an all-encompassing term that includes physical, mental, and social aspects. And participation is when we're actually able to be involved in a meaningful way in our life situations. And there are many barriers to participation that we'll get into a little bit at the end, although we certainly won't be able to cover them all comprehensively. But I bring these things up because when a person is able to participate in the things that matter to them, that are born again of choice, motivation, and meaning, you'll hear me repeat that phrase a bunch of times, when they're able to participate in occupations or tasks that meet those characteristics, their health is actually better. They are healthier physically, they are healthier mentally, they are healthier socially, spiritually, emotionally, and sort of all of these different aspects. So when we talk about this, it's not just, do I do thing A or thing B? It's making a conscious value-driven choice that the thing we do is actually going to affect our health. So I know at this point, you may still be a little like, I don't understand occupations. I, as an occupational therapist, have spent at least 50% of my career just explaining what occupational therapy is. And so I want to make sure that we really lay that foundation and we're speaking the same language. So we're going to talk a little bit more about occupation, about the what we do piece, and how that all adds up into who we are. So before we dive into this slide, I want to stop and show you a worksheet that you can use as we move along in the rest of the presentation. I know for some people, it might feel better to sort of pause as I go along, and you can fill out the worksheet that goes along with the presentation. Or for some people, I know they may prefer to just fill it out at the end, and that's fine too. There's an option for that. Obviously, being virtual, you can do it sort of however it feels best for you. So I'm gonna share that worksheet so you know which one it is, and then you can pause me whenever I finish speaking about a particular thing so that you can fill it out if you'd like. So this worksheet is called What Occupies Your Time, and it is in the links or the comments below, I believe. And so at different points in the presentation, I will talk a little bit about occupations. We're going to talk about body and skills and rituals, roles, routines, and habits. We're getting into that right now. So you can pull that up and pause me and fill that out as you go. These questions at the end, leave those for later if you would. We're going to get to those together at the end. Okay. I'm going to switch us back over to our presentation. I love these quotes because they emphasize for me the importance of what we're talking about. So Mary Riley is a famous person in the OT world, and I've updated the pronouns of this quote a bit, but it says, people, through the use of their hands, as they are energized by their mind and will, can influence the state of their own health. So again, by using your by using your hands metaphorically, in a manner where you are, passionate about it, and you have it, it gives meaning to your life, and it is born of choice and motivation, you can influence the state of your own health. This other quote says, a core philosophical assumption of the profession of occupational therapy, therefore, is that by virtue of all our biological endowment, people of all ages and abilities require occupation to grow and thrive. You can't grow and thrive without having new challenges, new tasks to engage in on a routine basis. In pursuing occupation, humans express the totality of their being, a mind, body, spirit union. So again, what we do adds up into this mind, body, spirit union. It becomes so much more than just a task that's happening in the course of our day or in the course of our life. It is a portion, a deep portion of who we are as individuals. Because human existence could not otherwise be, humankind is in essence occupational by nature. We are born to do, and the doing gives meaning to the rest of our life and our activities. So in OT, we like to break this down even further. So we're going to go down a rabbit hole for a minute of OT speak and OT language. If this is like an intro to occupational therapy practice in some ways. So let's talk a little more about occupations. This is sort of a day in the life of you, okay? You wake up, well, this is a day in the life of me, actually, me pre-COVID. You wake up, shower, get dressed, get the kids ready for school, have breakfast, get to work, maybe later you run an errand, you get to have lunch with a friend. Aspirational me goes to the gym at 5 o'clock. Real life me does not, but aspirational me goes to the gym, picks up the kids, cooks dinner, helps with homework, puts the kids to bed, does the dishes, picks up the house, spends time with my significant other, watches my favorite TV show, and go to sleep. So all of these activities in the course of a day are part of my occupations, but it's the doing and the meaning ascribed to them. There's not deep meaning for me in cooking dinner, but there is deep meaning for me in caring for my family. I don't really like cooking. I don't really like being, in charge of feeding all the people all the time, but I deeply care and value about caring for my family. And so for me, cooking dinner is an expression of that. So even these sort of mundane tasks in the course of our day have an ascribed meaning to them. I care deeply about being financially secure, that's and stable, and so that's important to me. And so by cooking dinner at home, we're able to, achieve more financial security and achieve our goals in that way. So do I want to cook dinner? No, but there are things attached to it. There are meanings attached to that task for me that make those tasks more meaningful. A lot of these things fall under the category of ADLs, or activities of daily living. These are the basics: eat, sleep, dress, move, go places. These are often the tasks we take most for granted. They're the things that when you actually come see me in treatment, often you're having a problem with one of these things, and we work to restore that function. But in the course of our everyday lives, much of our daily routine is structured around these sorts of things. There's also a whole constellation of other activities that we call instrumental activities of daily living, IADLs. And these are things that are, I would say, a little more advanced. So beyond the basics, now we do things like work and volunteer, and we have leisure pursuits, and we socialize, or we did prior to COVID. We care for our pets, we drive, we cook, we make meaning of our lives through some form of spiritual activity, we shop. The intimacy we have with our significant others or other people, education. All of these things are tasks, individual kind of isolated occupations that we piece together and ultimately form these other structures. And so habits are when you have sort of automatic behaviors. You do them all the time. There's very little variation. Um, so for me, an automatic thing is, I hang my keys on the key hook when I get in the door. I don't even think about it. It's just where the keys go. Setting my alarm. Right at this point, I just do. I've done it every day for however many years. Looking both ways before crossing the street. These are just ingrained things that we do. Then we also have routines. Routines are pretty much whatever you did to get ready this morning. It's what I showed you on that last slide. They're observable, regular patterns of behavior that provide structure to daily life. So it's just kind of the way you go about organizing all these other little things that you do. They become your routine. Then we have rituals. Rituals are the tasks that give a little extra meaning to things. They are symbolic events. They're often tied to emotion or some sort of spiritual or cultural or social meaning. So they don't have to be things that are necessarily like, when I say spiritual or ritual, people often think church. And that can be a piece of it, but it's also things like singing the same bedtime story, or reading the same bedtime story to your kids every night, or singing a specific song, or the specific way you say goodbye to your significant other in the morning that has, significance or meaning to you. The little text that you send to your mom every day, holiday celebrations, sending birthday cards. These are things that are not necessarily routine, or may be routine, but they also have kind of a deeper meaning to them. There's just something really extra significant about them. And then finally, we have roles. And roles are the sets of behaviors that are expected by society. They're shaped by culture and context. And then we get to take that role on and define it more. So if you say something like a student with a learning disability, or a father to young children, or an executive, or a single mother, those are all roles that people can play, and they have a connotation to them. When you hear them, you may have kind of an initial mental picture. That's that part that's shaped by society and by culture and by context. So, we have those images of what it is to be this kind of person, or this category of person, when we see that on television or in movies or in media or in our own families. But then we get to take that and decide, what does it mean for us? So we get to take that portion of what society tells us this role might be, and we get to decide for ourselves which part of that societal definition does or does not fit. And then we define it further. Okay, so here's the thing. You take all of this together, and if you can conceptualize this with me for a moment, your habits, just the automatic things you do in the course of a day, become your routines. Automatically set my alarm, automatically get up at 6, I pour my coffee, I make the kids breakfast. Now I've got a routine. Those little habits have become my routine. Those routines ultimately comprise the roles that we're playing in society. That's me being a mom. That's me being a business owner. That's me being an occupational therapist. All of these different things that add up, all these little tasks that I do in the course of a day, are who I am. They are my role in society. So interestingly, likewise, I think it can go the other direction. If you choose a role for yourself, or are given a role by society or by circumstance, and you are living in a certain role, it's going to define your routine. My routine before I had the role of parent looked very different. That role, working backwards, defined my routines, which changed my habits. And so they work both ways. Now, the interesting thing about roles and routines and habits is that they can be helpful. They can be useful habits. They can be things that promote your success. They can also be dominating. They can be habits that get in the way of you functioning and doing other things. You can have habits that are impoverished. You have a lack of habits, which means there's not that much structure to your day, to your routine, and maybe even to the meaning you ascribe to roles. Likewise, your routines can be satisfying. You can be happy with the way your routine generally runs. It can, add meaning to your life, and it can support the roles that you want to live. But they can also be damaging. There can be routines that ultimately don't add up to the roles that we deeply value and would like to be expressing in the course of our lives. So if we stop and think for a moment, hopefully I've made the case for you that your habits and your routines become your roles, and that the roles that you are in right now, either by choice, by motivation, by meaning, or by circumstance. Many of us end up in roles that we didn't necessarily choose for ourselves. Um, but those roles may be prescribing the routines and the habits that your daily life is made up of. If you stop and think about whether those habits, routines, and roles feel like they're promoting who you want to be as a person, or are they getting in the way of actually being the person that you envision wanting to be, of writing the story that feels satisfying to you? So if we stop and look at that, we have to think a little bit about where these roles and habits and routines come from. So first of all, why do we do what we do? Okay, so we talk about things in the context of choice, motivation, and meaning in the ideal circumstance. And this is sort of where we get the why from. These are our values. These are our deeply held beliefs that help us to, sort of guide our path and choose the habits and routines and roles that we want. Our beliefs about the world around us and who we are as a person. Our spirituality, whatever meaning making template of sorts you use to make sense of the world. And it seems like it kind of doesn't fit, but our body functions in our structure. So we don't do occupations or activities in a bubble. We do them inside of this frame. This body is capable of doing certain things and not so much other things. If I ascribed or aspired, to the role of elite athlete, I can tell you right now, this body is not built for that. And so I would need to figure that out. There'd be a mismatch between the body I have and the role I want to have. And that happens on a more tangible basis. I think about young mothers who have young babies at home, and their body functions, they are exhausted, they're tired, and yet they probably deeply value being a parent. And so those two things can feel in conflict when you just don't have any more reserves to give, and yet you want to give more. So why we do what we do comes from that, when we have to sort of sort out what we have to offer as a body, and then what we want to embrace as a person. Beyond that is sort of how we do what we do. Okay? So these are the skills that we possess in our body and mind, and the social interactions that we have. So there's sort of why I do what I do, and then how I go about doing it. Again, I mentioned cooking, right? So I value taking care of my family. I don't have amazing cooking skills. You're not going to find me on MasterChef anytime soon. So how I do it is maybe a little bit different than how somebody else would meet that value. And then finally, environments where we do these tasks. We don't complete our daily activities in a bubble. It's not just us moving on this track throughout the world without anybody else. Along the way, we're brushing up against other people, and we influence them, and they influence us in the roles and activities that we are desiring to do. So our environments, where we're doing these activities, can be physical. They can be literal structures, where we work and we play, our house, our office. They can also be social. So it's the constellation of people that you know, what our expectations are for them, what they expect of us. And so this, I think with COVID, is a big piece of it, right? Where the environment in which we've been practicing all of our regular routines and hobbies and roles and things has dramatically shifted. So if we think about the before time, um, we were operating kind of whatever little world we operated in. Maybe you worked at this place or that place, you went to this school or that school, you know, ate out at this restaurant or that restaurant. And now we're still trying to maintain all those values and beliefs and meaning making. We're still trying to exert those skills that we need to do, but we're having to do them in a completely new way where we may not have those skills, or they may not fit with our values or beliefs, to be operating in a solely virtual environment. So we've shifted really into considering environments also in terms of cultural environments, personal environments, where what you ascribe to the world around you, temporal, meaning time of year, time of day, and then virtual context, which have become ever more important. So again, just to walk through this, again, we've established, I hope, that occupations, that what you do is deeply important for your health and your well-being. And that occupations are ideally born of choice, of motivation, and of meaning, and occur in a supportive environment. And again, we'll talk a little bit about when that's not a reality, but ideally, we're doing the things that we do because we want to, because they matter to us, and because we have the means and the support around us to do them. And so when we're able to do that, our habits become routines that become roles that are fulfilling. Or we are able to choose roles for ourselves and build routines and habits around them that are fulfilling. And we do those things and structure them in a variety of ways, so it doesn't look the same for every person. But ideally, that's what we're crafting. And so at this point, the challenge is deciding why. Why do I want to do what I want to do? Because all these things that we've talked about have largely been hows, how you spend your time, how you organize your day, how skilled you are at different tasks. But we've got to get clear on the why piece. Your hows might be running really smoothly, right? The how you do things, it might be on autopilot, less so right now, but before COVID and hopefully soon after, how you go about doing things is probably pretty rote at this point. But if it doesn't match your why, right? If you are just on autopilot, operating smooth as could be, doing whatever habit, role, routine you've been doing, but over here is this why, and there's no meaning attached to all these things that you're doing, that ship will eventually run ashore, right? That's hard to sustain on a soul level, to be routinely engaged in tasks that don't fit who we are as a person. And I want to be clear, I don't mean that they're like ethical violations. I don't mean you're being asked to do something that is wrong, just that it is not a good fit for you. It doesn't uphold or take advantage of the skills you have, the beliefs that you have, the values that you ascribe to things. And so values are how we determine what is right, what's good, what's important to do. There are deeply held convictions that drive everything else. And many of us are not accustomed to making decisions based off values consciously. We often make decisions off of our gut, right? That gut feeling. I know that this is the right choice for me or the wrong choice for me. So we do, but it's hard for us sometimes to put a name to it and say, I'm going to choose this path because it supports this value. Or I'm going to make this other choice because it actually doesn't support these values. Many of us also have lived our way, maybe even accidentally, into roles and routines that we didn't choose. We got on a path, in part by life circumstances. We may not have had a choice. And so we're just on a path, and we've never had the opportunity to stop and examine if this path that we're on actually matches the values we have. But the very first step to that is getting clear on what those values are. Because we tend to feel in conflict when our deepest held values are compromised in some way. If you can't name that conflict, it can be difficult. If you don't know why something is bothering you, you won't know what to do about it. If you can't figure out what the problem is, right, it can be difficult to enact change so that your story is the story that you're looking for. So I'm gonna ask you to pause the screen, and there is a link. Well, don't pause it yet, I need to explain. There is a link in, I believe, the chat box that has a link to this document. I'll pull it up here on the screen, but I will tell you there are too many words for you to easily look at it on here. But this is a values list. This is not all encompassing. There are many other values. You also may not have the same connotation for it. So this comes from a list that is pretty widely available on the internet, although I've combined a few things. But this is a sort of just a standard description, and it may not be the one that resonates with you when you see that word. So it's okay. You can change the meaning that's ascribed to that word. And some of them also may not resonate at all, and that's also okay. And a lot of them may resonate, and that's also okay. Again, if a value that's on this sheet doesn't really click for you, that doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean you don't think that thing is important. It just means that it's not a guiding principle for how you make decisions in your daily life. So we're going to do an activity that I know is going to feel a little hard. So this may take you a few minutes. It is important you give yourself a timer. So give yourself about a max of 5 minutes to do this, because otherwise you can get sort of down a rabbit trail, and it can be hard to do. But what I want you to start doing is put a rectangle around the 7 to 10 values that resonate most. Sort of if you were on a deserted island and could only take 10 values with you, what would you take? Okay, and there is a space at the bottom for you to create your own if you feel like something is missing on this sheet. Okay, so now would be a good time to pause and give yourself a couple minutes to do that. Okay, so I'm going to assume now that you have put a rectangle around your 7 to 10 values. If you're someone who reads the directions and works ahead, you may already be done and have done the next step, and that's okay. But the next step is, of those 7 to 10 values that you selected, which are the 3 that you think most guide your daily activities, that you would be the most uncomfortable or feel the most strain if they were in conflict? The 3 values that you hold nearest and dearest to your heart, and make your decisions based off of when you're able to have a choice in your decisions. And this often feels hard because there's going to be 4 to 7 values, depending on how many you circled originally, that you're not going to be able to bring along with you in your suitcase to this island that we're traveling to. And so it's important, again, to remember you're not saying that those aren't important, but that when it comes down to it, there are usually a couple of really core values that you've got to make decisions based off of. And so I want you to circle those 3 now. Okay, so I'm going to assume you've done that and you're back. For me, and my deepest held values have changed a bit over time, but family is certainly one of them, and it's one of my deepest held values to care for and be available to my family. Knowledge, or rather, I would really say personal growth. These are ones that I tease apart. But personal growth, being deeply committed to continuing to learn and change and grow, so that 5 years from now, I'm not the same person that I am, that's sitting here talking to you over this screen. I want to be somebody different. to grow and learn, are two of my most important values. And so when I start to think about what I want and what choices I'm going to make, I'm going to look at those two. And then the third one for me is stability. That sounds super boring, but I actually just really value things kind of being predictable, kind of knowing what to expect. And for me, sort of, I like to plan my spontaneity. That's sort of the joke in my family, that like on Saturday I'll be spontaneous. That's just comforting to me. I don't necessarily like to have a life full of surprises and adventure and, never knowing what's around the next corner. So I look at those three things, at family, personal growth, and stability, when I make my choices, to make sure that any habit I'm going to develop or change to my routine is going to support my personal growth. It's not going to jeopardize my family, and it's not going to create instability. And that's largely how I make decisions about what I'm doing and whether the things I'm doing are going to work for me. So I'm going to jump back over to our presentation for just a second. Bear with me while I share this screen. Okay, so hopefully what you've done now is isolated those values. Okay. And those were the instructions there. Okay, but let's talk for a moment about what gets in the way. I've been alluding to this a little bit. It's, again, ideal if your occupations are born of choice and meaning and motivation, and that they represent those values that we just discussed. But I very much recognize that there are things that get in the way of being able to do that. Some of those things can be competing values. So if you have a value of adventure, you really love adventure, but also security. Or in my case, what if I have kids and I love them and they love adventure, but I really like stability? How do I provide them both things? So sometimes our values in and of themselves can both be deeply held, but at conflict with each other. Some of the other barriers can be performance skills. So again, your body, the shell that you live in, is what enables you, as Mary Riley said, people through the use of their hands. So literally enacting your body to be able to do things can be a barrier for some people. If you experience chronic illness, if you don't have simply enough strength, if you don't know how to do something, you don't have the knowledge base to participate in something, that's going to get in the way of you participating in those meaningful things. You may also have a lack of occupational or a lack of environmental support. So sometimes there's a poor match between the person and the environment. And really, I think the virtual world we're living in is the best example of that right now. Many of us are very good at our jobs. Many of our kids were doing just fine at school. And then all of a sudden we all moved to a virtual environment. And now I'm trying to be teacher mom, and I'm trying to work on technology-based interfaces for my job, and I don't feel maybe as successful. Well, that's not because I've done anything, but the environment around me is no longer supporting me to fulfill those roles. So sometimes it's that. And on a regular basis, it may be things like, I have a great job, but it's so far away. I've got to commute 45 minutes an hour, and that really gets in the way of me also being able to be a parent. It may be that your disability or your physical needs keep you from literally an inaccessible building, something that's just, you literally can't get into the space that you need to be able to participate. So in a lot of different ways, the world around you can create a barrier. But then there's this final barrier that I think is really important, and it's like, it feels funny to me now that it's just the last bullet point, because again, this was written before COVID, and obviously issues of injustice are not new due to COVID, but they certainly have come to an even more pressing head in the forefront of society's consciousness during this time. And so it's not, it needs a whole presentation, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Occupational injustice refers to the fact that there are very real barriers that keep a person from participating in the activities they might like. Occupational justice, can refer to things on the most primitive level of, do you have the right to live, as we've seen in recent weeks and months and years? It can mean, do you have access to Wi-Fi in your area of town? Do you have the same public service infrastructure in the area that you live that allows you to have clean water and reliable electricity and roadways and lighting and all of those sorts of things? Do you have access to bus routes that enable you to go to and from work at the hours that you need to? And are those bus routes and bus stops safe? There are many, many aspects of occupational injustice that we could get into. And so I do want to make sure that I acknowledge that, because I don't want to paint a rosy picture, and I don't want you to leave the presentation thinking that I'm implying that everyone can just clarify their values and then make a change and then be living the perfect life. That's not what this is about at all. But it is about recognizing whether or not the things that you are doing add up to what you would like, and clarifying your values so that you recognize that, and beginning to think about what's in the way, and then beginning to think about what you have some change over, what you have some ability to control. And that's going to be very different for different folks, and there's inherent privilege in that, but some of us are going to have more ability to make change in our personal lives than others are. So I think it's really important that as we focus on the things that we change, we have grace and understanding and allyship where it's appropriate for those who can't make those changes so readily. And that we are good allies in working to equalize those opportunities, because, again, this is an issue of health. Folks who are better able to live the lives and the life story that they envision for themselves are healthier people all around. And there are very real health consequences to not being able to do those things. So the overarching definition of occupational injustice is a justice that recognizes occupational rights to inclusive participation in everyday occupations for all persons in society, regardless of their age, ability, race, ethnicity, gender identity, social class, sexual orientation, or any other difference. And so as we talk about barriers to meaningful engagement, it's just important to recognize and honor that even in your own life, having grace for yourself for the things that may be preventing you from making those changes. Again, some of us have lived our way into a path that we maybe wouldn't have chosen for ourselves, but circumstances dictated that. So having some grace for yourself, if that's the situation, and understanding that we clarify our values and we look towards what we can change. And we work to help those and be a good ally for those who don't have the ability to make those changes as readily as some of us would. So let's zoom out for just a minute and stop and think for a second. I have a worksheet here. Let me pull this up for you in just a second. And so this handout sort of discusses all of the different things that we've talked about. And so what I want you to do is take a moment and fill this out. Again, the link should be somewhere down in the comment section or the live stream notification itself. But these are where you're going to write those 3 values that you clarified. And then over here, I want you to take a moment and I want you to think about the occupations that you engage in on a pretty regular basis. And again, thinking maybe pre-COVID, if it's been substantially different for you. And then within these categories, you can list more specific. So you can list, what sort of educational activities you're working in, what sort of leisure pursuits you do. but list those things. And then I want you to list, when it comes to your body and your skills, in what way does your body support your abilities or get in the way of you participating in those daily activities? Okay, so then you're going to fill this section out. I want you to stop and think about the routines. What do those daily routines look like for you? Are they satisfying? Are they promoting? Are they damaging? Are they helping you? What's sort of getting in the way, or what's working? And then embedded in those routines are probably some rituals, some little things that you do that are just extra meaningful and significant for you. And so I want you to write down what those rituals are. Uh, and then in this next section, I want you to fill out your roles and your habits. Okay, so maybe starting with habits might be the easiest. So what are some habits that you have, and are they useful? Are they damaging, dominating? Do they get in the way of other things? So, for example, going to the gym might be a really good habit, but if it actually sort of gets in the way of being with your family and that's a value, then that's a dominating habit that may be getting in the way. And then again, impoverished means you don't have quite enough habits. Maybe there's some things you need to develop some habits around. And then finally, some roles. So we talked a little about those earlier. These are those overarching categories that sort of define who you are as a person, and that you ascribe some meaning to, but there's also some meaning in society about what it means to be those things. So listing those roles. And after you've done all of that, okay, I want you to stop and consider these questions. So you may have listed a number of occupations, number of things that you do. How much time do you spend doing each of those things? Does it feel balanced? Oftentimes rest and leisure go out the window. There's not enough of those in the course of the day. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you actually are sort of not engaging in enough productive type activities. You want to be working more, you want to be educating yourself more, volunteering more, but there's not enough of that. So there's no right or wrong. The question is really just, does it feel balanced for you? Okay. Are there meaningful rituals that you've set aside? So what would it feel like if you picked those back up and you incorporated them into your daily routine? And again, these things can be as simple as reading the paper while drinking a cup of coffee in the morning. These things can be sitting outside and listening to the birds. They can be listening to a certain song that just pumps you up or calms you down on the way into work. They don't have to be time-consuming things, but what are some little things that maybe you used to do and you just don't anymore, or that you would like to build a ritual around? Are there routines or habits that feel less useful? What might make them feel more useful or more meaningful? What could you maybe do that would make them feel like they were a better expression of your values? Or how can you reframe them to be a better expression of your values? Along those lines, take a look at your habits, your routines, your roles, your daily activities. Do they seem to support or contradict your values? Do your daily activities allow you to express some of your deepest held values? And then finally, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to envision what life might look like 5, 10, 20 years in the future. Maybe tomorrow, maybe 3 weeks from now, however much time you can sort of envision into the future. But think about, what if nothing changes? What if you envision life just as it is sometime in the future and nothing has changed? Does that vision feel hopeful, or does it feel concerning? And if it does feel concerning, what do you need to change, if anything? Again, some of us are maybe living lives that closely match our values, and we're able to engage in things that have meaning for us, and we're able to make meaning in the world. And so maybe 5, 10 years from now, I actually want to be kind of doing basically the same thing. And for some of us, that's not the case at all. For some of us, the world and the routine and the roles that we're playing out just actually feels really soul crushing if we think about doing that again for another 10 or 15 years. And so in that case, what would it look like to do something a little bit different? Okay, so you've got this sheet. This is something that you can stop and spend some time doing. It's not something you have to do all in one burst. If you sort of paused and worked along with me, great. But take a few moments and sit with those questions. Switch back to our presentation. So again, these are questions that are not meant to answer right away. They could require some time, hours or days, or maybe even weeks. But and maybe you're not really even all that clear on what you do in a day. Maybe you've forgotten in COVID time. Maybe the habits and routines you have are just sort of, you've never really stopped to think about it. So it's a great time to just sort of put that up on the fridge or tuck it away in your journal or whatever works for you, and go back and sort of answer those things over the course of time, and fill that out as you go. Okay. So coming to the conclusion here, we've talked about how what we do can dramatically and significantly impact who we are as a person, the little tasks that we do, and can also impact our health. We've talked about all the components of what makes up what you do. It's more than just a task and an activity, but the meaning subscribed to it, the environment in which you're doing it, the social context, the people you do it with, the way you go about it, the meaning that you give to it. We've talked about what gets in the way very briefly, but we've talked about the reality that there are some things that get in the way of being able to enact choice, motivation, and meaning in our daily lives. And I've given you a tool to help you stop and take stock of that for a moment. So I'll return to sort of my original question, which is, what occupies our time? Is it what we do or who we are? And again, I would make the case to you that ultimately what we do and who we are inextricably linked, that who we are ultimately drives what we do, and that what we do ultimately drives who we are. And that it is important from time to time to stop and zoom back and take a look and make sure that all those components are ones that we actually would choose to put in place. And to honor the fact that we may not be able to automatically change something. We may not have choice. We may not have motivation. We may not know what's going to feel meaningful. But that in order to write a story that is meaningful to us, we've got to stop and look at that. We've got to stop and say, what would I change if I could? And then from there, the figuring out how to change is a whole other presentation. But it starts with figuring out what you'd like in the first place. So I want to leave you with this conclusion. It's a poem. It's called The Dash, and I'm going to read it out loud, although you can certainly pause my voice and read it for yourself if you prefer. But I think this really kind of encapsulates the point I've been hoping to convey. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone, from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke of the following date with tears, but he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time they spent alive on earth, and now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. To be less quick to anger and show appreciation more and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering that this special dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you lived your dash? So I'm going to leave you with that last line to ponder, and I will put this up on the screen for a moment if you feel like you'd like to get in touch with me for any reason, if you want me to share some of the resources related to this presentation, or just chat about your dash. I'd be happy to share and chat with you a little bit. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to listen. And I hope you found it a little bit meaningful for you. Thanks so much.